The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said, "But I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for He is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
So when I read this, I remembered a news story I'd seen a few months back. I wonder if any of you saw it as well. It was back in October, and it was in the run-up to the midterm elections, and there were two candidates who were vying for a seat in the State House of Representatives in Vermont. So they got together for a debate at their local library, and at the end of the debate, they said what happened was the two candidates finished, they stood up, and all of a sudden they started moving tables and chairs around. No one really knew what they were doing, so they just kind of sat and watched. And once they were satisfied where things were, the two candidates disappeared around the corner, and a couple seconds later returned. And when they came back, the Republican candidate was carrying a guitar, and the Democratic candidate was carrying a cello. And next thing you know, the two of them sat down in the chairs that they had gotten out and performed a song together. Together. They sang a duet for this crowd that was gathered there. Did anyone remember seeing that? Okay, a couple people. Okay, I'm not crazy. I mean, I am. But it seemed to be something that kind of made headlines, right? Which during the midterm season, as we know, that's saying something. You know, for anything to be newsworthy, it had to be pretty important. And I believe this story of these two little-known candidates in this little-known town in the middle of Vermont made the headlines because what they did interrupted the way that we understand how politics should be. And ultimately, it interrupted the way that we understand how the world is supposed to operate. You know, we've been taught recently that these two individuals, for what they're doing, they should be hating each other. They should be bragging about how much better they are than the other person. How dare they sit down and sing a song together? So in some follow-up news I saw where people in that town were so moved by this event that they witnessed that they put up signs for both candidates in their yards. But wait, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Right? You support one candidate, you vote for that candidate, and the other candidate's a worthless piece of trash that we do everything in our power to disgrace and dehumanize. Now that's how this works. Okay, so obviously I have some strong opinions on how the political discourse in our country is happening right now. But the story of these two politicians who sat down after the debate to sing a song together, I think absolutely reflects what Jesus is teaching and showing the crowds who have followed him here to this level plain. He said, "Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, offer the other cheek when struck, offer your clothes when someone takes your coat, give to everyone who begs from you." Come on, Jesus. Again, that's not how this works. This makes no sense to us in this world. Because we live in this cause and effect kind of world. You do this, you get this. Things should make sense in that way. I mean, that's at least the way we want them to be, right? If someone says something bad about you or does something bad to you, what's your natural instinct on how to respond? Probably to say or do something bad back to that person. If someone hits you, the response is usually to hit back harder. If someone takes from you, get that back. And if someone hates you with all their guts, how could you not hate them back? I mean, this seems to be the way the things are anymore. And it appears to be the way the things have always been. And with the way most all of us act, it seems to be the way we want it to be. But not Jesus. Jesus showed up to interrupt that cycle. And he's calling us to interrupt this cycle each and every day in our life of faith. I mean, think about it. It's probably a good thing that Callahan can't walk. Can he walk yet? No, he good. Because if he knew that this is the way we were called to live because of this baptism he just experienced, he would probably get up and walk out that door and never come back. Actually, I'm really surprised that all of you aren't getting up and walking out the door when you hear these words from Jesus. Because this way of life is hard. I'm not going to deny that fact, and Jesus wouldn't deny that either. So what if we changed the way we thought about it? What if Luke's telling of this story didn't cause us to want to get up and walk out, but rather get up and celebrate a great hope of what God has done for us in this world? You think about how we hear this story. A lot of times it feels like when we hear this teaching, we're almost thinking Jesus is commanding us to live a certain way. Love one another or else. Turn the other cheek or else. Give to everyone who begs from you or else. We're never going to fully live up to these commands, so instead we lean back on God's forgiveness and grace and say, it'll be okay if we don't do those things because, we're only doing it for the reward. That leads us into that cause and effect kind of thinking. If we do those things, Jesus even said, your reward will be great and you will be children of the Most High. Great, okay, so we follow the teaching and we'll be favored by God, we'll get into heaven, end of story. But what if for just a moment we set that thinking aside and instead look at Jesus' teachings as a promise instead of a command? Could we look at all of this as a way of God saying, the world does not have to be like this. We don't have to be constantly measuring and counting and weighing and competing and judging and paying back and hating and all the rest of those things, because there is another way. There is a way to interrupt this cycle of how we treat one another in this world. There is a way that is filled with love. I feel like I saw it on a bumper sticker once, but somewhere I heard someone say something along the lines of, love your neighbors, it'll drive them crazy. It might not be exactly what Jesus is going for, but maybe. Because if someone does treat us badly, we don't have to perpetuate this cycle and treat them badly back. But unfortunately, I have to say, on the other side of this, I've also heard people take that line that Jesus speaks about praying for those who abuse you, and they take that to mean that if someone is abusing you, you just pray and it'll get better. or that you just have to allow yourself to be abused because it'll work out in the end. No. I mean, that line there, that's a gross misinterpretation of that. If you're being abused, speak up. When Jesus says pray for that person, it does mean that you can walk away and hold them accountable for their actions. I mean, what Jesus is saying are truly words of hope. And I think if we see these words as a word of promise, it tells us that there is indeed a whole other world in which we can live, right here, right now, where we can tangibly experience the transformation that Jesus is offering. I mean, isn't that the point of this Epiphany season that we're in here in the church? That Jesus did come into this world for a reason, and that because he is here, the world is a different place. And yeah, part of Jesus being here means that we are called to live in a different way. We're called to treat others the way we want to be treated. Do to others as you would have them do to you. But I think it's also important and interesting that it does not say, treat others this way so that they'll treat you the same. No, we are called to treat others in this way of love, no matter how they treat us first, and without expectation of being treated a certain way in return. I mean, think of the story of Joseph that we heard in the first lesson. Joseph was almost put to death and was eventually sold into slavery by his brothers. And when they eventually return and encounter one another again, Joseph has every reason in the books to be hateful and angry and mad at them. But what does he do? He welcomes them and he loves them. Isn't that what we're called to do? I mean, it doesn't sound fair, that's for sure. I mean, we want to be treated well and fairly and not be taken advantage of. If someone on the streets asks me for $1, how will I know that they're going to use my hard-earned dollar in a responsible way? Well, we don't. We don't know that. We don't know if treating someone with respect, someone who's just utterly mean and hateful, is going to do a darn thing. But that's why we leave the transformation up to Jesus. What we can do is interrupt this cycle of matching blow for blow and word for word by responding with grace and kindness. Because that's what God does. Jesus said, "Be merciful just as your Father in heaven is merciful." And it doesn't always make sense. But because Jesus did come into this world, everything can be different. Everything is different. Because we are baptized together into this life with him, we can trust that Christ is our strength, and we do not have to let the cycles of this world continue as they are. And by seeing all these things as a promise from God instead of a command, we can set aside that guilt of not always living up to this call from Jesus, and instead interrupt those tiring cycles of this world with deep love from God. And maybe we can even get to the point in this world where we can sit down with our opponent face to face and maybe even sing a song together. Thanks be to God. Amen.